Hey everyone, how y'all doing? My name is Mateo and I am from Maschine Masters. This is part 2 of a 2-part tutorial on boosting bass presence in your mix. This time, I'm going to show you the manual way of doing this. If you want to see how I achieved a similar sound to this with Renaissance bass from Waves, feel free to check out our previous tutorial for Mix Talk Mondays. Okay, so here I have a bass track in our mix without any processing. So let's take a listen to it and hear how it sounds in the mix. Cool. All right, sounds pretty good, but we want to make sure that this bass translates pretty well on most speakers. So I'm going to show you the manual way that I achieve this. And it might seem a bit of a daunting process, but I'm telling you it's well worth the work because it really does help with getting bass to cut through in a mix really well. So first thing you're going to do with your bass is duplicate it. Great, so we have 2 of the exact same bass now. The reason why I'm doing this is because I'm going to create a high bass track and a low bass track. So I'm going to label them accordingly. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is create an auxiliary track, which I'm going to run both bass tracks through. Now, this will just make managing the 2 bass tracks easier, and it's going to allow us to apply additional processing to the entire bass part. Now make sure you made a mono auxiliary track because this is bass and it's a mono track. Next thing we're going to do is label the auxiliary track and select its input. Now I'm just going to choose any available input. I like the number 23. Why not? Now what you're going to do is set the outputs of your 2 bass tracks through the auxiliary input. Great. So let's hear our bass through the auxiliary. Now, essentially what we have is the exact same bass part, just louder because we've duplicated. And that's what happens when you duplicate a track and do nothing to it in regards to processing or levels. It's just double the loudness. So we're going to start processing our bass tracks now. I'm going to solo them. And let's see here. You know what? I'm going to group them first. Let's create a group. Are they grouped? Yes, they are. Cool. So let's make our selection and let's solo them. So this is what we're going to do with our 2 bass tracks. We are going to use a filter on both of them and isolating the high frequencies and the low frequencies. Now this is important because you're going to essentially choose your crossover for these 2 bass parts. So I'm going to open up my filter of choice, which is the MIC DSP filters. You can use any filters. Great. Now I'm going to open up both so we can see both. Now, the configuration of the filters will vary depending on the type of bass that you have and the mix that you have. Typically, I start off with a minus 12 decibel per octave filter. You can play around with the filters, but that's usually what I start off with. So I'm going to start off with my low bass. I'm going to solo it, and I'm going to start rolling off the high frequencies and kind of hear what frequencies I want the low bass to occupy. So this is the filter for my low bass. I'm going to deactivate the high pass filter. And I'm going to start bringing down my low pass filter as I'm playing the bass. So I kind of like around 182 hertz. That's where I've rolled it down to because it's kind of bordering right where the treble portion of the bass kind of comes in. And that's the point of this. You want to separate the really low end, the meat of the bass, and then separate that from the trebly high end part of the bass. So because I've chosen 182 hertz here, this is essentially going to act as our crossover. So now with our high bass, we're going to start bringing it down to 182 hertz and hear how the two sound together. So let's just solo our high bass and hear what that sounds like. Cool. So you can hear there that there's a whole lot of that treble and like higher frequency kind of rumble and, more of the where we're going to get a lot of that grit in the bass from. So if I play both the high and the low basses together, they should sound like the one whole bass without the EQs. So let's listen to both. So, did you hear as I bypassed the filters just to verify that the bass sounds the same with and without, that it actually didn't? This technique right here introduces a serious problem. This problem is known as phasing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to flip the phase on one of the tracks. So be very mindful of this because this may happen to you. Most likely it will. So if you have the option to flip the phase on the actual track, or you have a plugin that you can use, or the filtering plugin you're using has a phase flipping option, flip it on one of the tracks, not on both, or else you're going to get the same thing again. So just flip it on one of them. So I usually just use the Avid one band EQ for the phase flip. I like it. So there you are. The tonality is very similar to each other. Difference being there's an increase in level when I completely bypass the EQs because, like I said, you're just doubling it, right? So we've got the overall tonality back, and that's what we want. The next thing that we're going to do, which is a really nice aspect of this technique, is adjusting the balance of our bass to really get the sound of the bass and treble that we want. So I'm going to close these filters. And I'm going to start with the low bass and get it to a level that I like in the mix. Great, so that was just the low bass track. Now I'm going to introduce the high bass track and get a nice balance of just the right amount of treble in that bass. Great. I really like that balance. I like a little bit of treble in there, but not too much. I like my basses to be a little more bass heavy, obviously. Next, we're going to go to the low bass track. And what I like to do with the low bass is try not to crush the life out of it, because the low bass is where you get that like groove and pulsing feel from, right? So I kind of want to accentuate that. And I typically do this with the low bass track. I add a transient designer and I increase the attack and reduce the sustain so we get a little more punch out of it. So I'm going to use the SPL transient designer and do that. So that right there helps me to add just a little more tightness and punch to that low end, which is nice because we don't want it to be flabby and muddy sounding. So the next thing that we're going to do is add a bit of processing to the high bass, because we really want to get that presence of the bass out there. And one way of doing that is just basically squashing the crap out of that high end. Now, the tool that I like to use for this particular task is the Air Lo-Fi plugin, which comes free with Pro Tools. The particular feature that I like in it acts as a leveler. So you could use pretty much any leveling plugin that you have. And when I say leveling plugin, I mean basically a compressor that is kind of designed to squash the crap out of something to the point of distortion or drive. But in a pleasant way. So some plugins really do this well, and this particular plugin does that. So this right here is the Air Lo-Fi, and the one parameter we're going to use to create this effect is the clip. So I'm going to solo the high bass, I'm going to play it back and increase the clip. Yeah, right there. Did you hear that? It's like starting to like overdrive and distort a bit. We want a little bit of that. So I'm going to leave it there for now. Hear how it sounds in context with the rest of the bass. Yeah, that sounds nice and aggressive. Let's hear it with the track. Cool. So it's a little loud in the mix. I'm going to bring it down a touch, and then we're going to move on to the last little bit, which is processing on the bus of the bass. Cool. So what I like to use when I'm processing bass on the bass bus auxiliary is the 1176. Now, Native Instruments has a really great emulation of the 1176. I usually use this particular compressor for this technique. Many of you in the Maschine Masters community should have this. I'm going to pull this up, and we're going to get the settings right for this bass. So this right here is the good old VC76. Now, when it comes to basses, I really like the compressor to be really snappy with basses, just to kind of emphasize punch and snap in it. So I typically start off with the attack really fast and the release really fast. I'll just set these all the way counterclockwise. And that right there is at their fastest settings. Next, I'm going to hit play, and we're going to adjust the inputs and outputs to get the balance and the compression just right. Great. So I set the input to about 22 and the output to about the same. Basically, with the input, what I was trying to do is get the gain reduction somewhere in the area between -3 and -5 decibels. We want a good amount of compression, but not too much where it's just completely sucking the life out of it. And that's also one of the reasons why I have the attack and release really fast, because I want that pumping action still there. And then with the output, I basically set it to match what the level is when I have the plugin bypassed. So we don't want to have the plugin influencing our hearing with loudness. Be mindful of that. And in this particular situation, I had left the ratio setting at 4:1. Now, keep in mind that these settings will vary depending on the bass and the context of the mix. So all of you out there might have different settings. But like I said, I usually start with the attack and release really fast because I want that kind of pumping action. All right, now let's listen to the bass with the rest of the mix again and make sure that the balance is pretty good. All right, I feel that's a pretty decent balance. Obviously, I will do my due diligence and reference the mix on various sound systems and earbuds, but for now, that's pretty good for our purposes. Now, I know this might seem like a complicated process, but this will give you the most amount of control of your bass and sculpting its sound. Another added benefit to doing this is a lot of people like to sidechain their kick to their bass. Now, something that I find is a bit problematic with this is that it's not always the entire bass that fights with the kick. It's usually just the low frequency part of the bass that really clashes with the kick. So when you sidechain the kick to the entire bass, it pumps the bass a little too much and you lose some of that presence. With this technique, you can actually apply a compressor like the VC76 and sidechain your kick to the compressor, and it will only affect the low part of the bass, but maintain the presence and high frequencies of the bass. I find that to be really advantageous. So that concludes our two-part series on bass presence. Thanks again to all of you that checked out this tutorial. We really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions about what we covered in this tutorial, please feel free to leave it in the comment section below. Also, if you have any suggestions for future tutorials, also leave that in the comment section below. As always, please like and share this video and subscribe to Maschine Masters to keep up with all our latest tutorials. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.